All right. Hello, government students. Move this out of the way here. I'm going to do a really quick explanation of the major principles of the U.S. Constitution. So, if you want to follow along with your handout that has got space for you to write the definition for each of these, you don't have to use my definition if you don't want. You can look up all the answers and put them in your own words, or you can kind of summarize the things that I go through. I will go pretty quickly. So if you need to pause the video at any point, feel free. So let's start up here at the top. Noon. First major principle of the Constitution is limited government. And basically, the simplest way to explain limited government is to think about the government's power being limited. And the government's power is limited by multiple things the Constitution says. For instance, probably one that you are most familiar with is the Bill of Rights, which says things like the government can't take away your right to free speech. So when we look at the government's power being limited, we can say, well, if the government's power was unlimited, they could take away your right to free speech or take away your right to practice whatever religion you wanted to, or throw you into jail without a jury trial. But since their power is limited, they can't do that. So that's provision number one, limited government. The next that we will look at over here at about 1:30 is federalism. So federalism may be the most important of all of these principles because federalism is how power is divided in the United States between the national government and the state governments. Probably a key word to remember is even though power is divided, power is technically shared. It is not equal. There's a big difference between power being shared and power being equal. There's certain things that the national government has the power to do, like declare war, for instance, that the states don't have the power to do. And there's certain things the states have the power to do, like give you a driver's license, that the national government doesn't have the power to do. So power is not shared, or I'm sorry, power is not equal, but it is shared. In fact, that concept is so important that the entire next chapter, chapter 4, is going to be about federalism. So the third principle over here, about 3 o'clock, is checks and balances. A lot of students have heard of checks and balances. They are familiar with the concept, but maybe don't know a lot of examples of checks and balances. So basically, there's 3 branches of government, and they all have different powers. But one of the things that is embedded in the Constitution is the ability of each of those branches to check the power of other branches. So probably the most common example that you'll see is the power to veto. So Congress makes laws, and the president has the ability to veto laws that Congress is thinking about trying to pass. So that's one example of checks and balances. Another example that we're living through right now is that the president has the ability to appoint Supreme Court justices. So those are 2 separate branches of the government. The president is the executive branch. He has the power to appoint. And then, of course, the judges are actually part of the judicial branch. But there's another built-in check in that even though the president appoints the justice, the Senate, which is part of the legislative branch, the Senate has to confirm the president's appointment. So there's lots of built-in checks and balances you'll discover throughout this class, especially as we study and learn more about Congress and the presidency and the judicial branch. You're going to see a lot of examples of checks and balances. The next example down here is popular sovereignty. So popular sovereignty, the best way to explain that is simply the idea that the people have the power, and we've looked at this concept a lot already this year in terms of like the social contract theory. But popular sovereignty is probably the best example of popular sovereignty that we see in this class is people having the ability to vote. The people having the power is, again, an extremely important concept of the government. And we see it through our ability to vote for the people who go represent us at the state and national level. So popular sovereignty, the people have the power. If you move over here to judicial review and you have this little wacky Marbury versus Madison thing, so I'll explain both. Judicial review is simply the Supreme Court's power to review whether or not a law that is made or a decision that is made or a policy that is made by the other branches of the government is constitutional. So if, for instance, Congress makes a law that bans women from voting, then the court, which Congress would probably not do that, but then that law would be challenged by the courts because it would violate the 19th Amendment to the Constitution, which gives women the right to vote. The Supreme Court, all 9 of those justices, are challenged by a lot of cases to interpret very random and specific parts of the Constitution. The cases are never as simple as the one that I just described. They could be, they're typically very complex. And we'll talk a lot more about judicial review in later units, but the connection to the case of Marbury versus Madison is that Marbury versus Madison was the first Supreme Court case where judicial review was used. So it was way back in the early 1800s, and the Supreme Court ruled on the constitutionality of a law for the first time. So judicial review has been around for several hundred years at this point. The last of the major principles of the Constitution is separation of powers. And students typically get that confused with federalism because both deal with the division of power. But whereas federalism was the division of power between the state and national government, separation of powers refers to the powers being divided between the 3 branches, the legislative, executive, and judicial branch. So, and again, that's a topic that we will expand on a lot throughout this course because several of our units deal directly with the different branches of government. So I hope that is a satisfactory explanation of all 6 of the principles of the Constitution. These principles will be things that we review throughout the entire course. So it's important that you know what they are and are familiar with them. And good luck finding current events that relate to the principles of the Constitution. I don't think it will be that difficult once you kind of get going and understand what's going on. So thank you, and we'll see you in the next video.